Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transporter beam. Now.
One, engage!
All right, hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. I am Michael, your host. If you are a new listener, you can find all of our shows past, present, and in the future wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Star Trek from the Holodeck. Our preferred feeds are Apple Podcast and Spotify. Give us a thumbs up and a review. We need it. It's very strange. I look at the review section and rating section on iTunes, and we have like 13 ratings. We have way more listeners than that. So please, if you want us to continue to do these shows, we have to be validated in some form. So please give us reviews. I mean, if you want us to do more shows, get into more topics during the off season, we have to have those ratings and review. Please do it. All right. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello, Mike. How's it going? You know what we have to add, Mike, into our intro? We have to add Burnham saying, "Let's fly."
No, that's never going to happen, David. How dare you? Can you please fly out that window?
Out that window.
That's the worst saying in all of Star Trek.
10 years from now, Mike, people will go, "Yeah, that's a cool thing.
No.
Let's fly."
Nope. My mom, she watches Discovery a little. She's not a big fan of Discovery. It's the only Star Trek series she's not really about. She's a huge Star Trek fan. She's the reason why I got into Star Trek when I was very young. And she has enjoyed pretty much every Star Trek series. The two that she has struggled with was, well, first it was Deep Space Nine. Yeah. Now she's gone back and she said she doesn't know what she was thinking, that this is really good, like a lot of Star Trek fans. But with Discovery, she usually waits a year to watch it because she just can't get into it. She loves Strange New Worlds. She loved the third season of Picard. But the thing she said to me when she came to visit the other day, she's all, "What is this with Burnham saying, 'let's fly'?" And I started laughing. I'm like, "Why? What's wrong with it, Mom? It's pretty cool, don't you think?" She goes, "It is the stupidest, corniest thing I have ever heard in Star Trek." I'm like, yeah.
You should have turned to her and says, "What? Let's fly."
It's all about how you say it. Let's fly.
Let's fly.
I would do something more like saddle up. Let's ride. Anything's better than let's fly.
Let's fly.
I hear that song, "Let's fly like an eagle." That's what I hear.
Yeah, that is what I hear too.
All right, so we're talking about episode 7 of Star Trek Discovery's 5th and final season, titled Erigah. The synopsis: with Mull and Locke in custody, the Federation is pulled into a diplomatic and ethical firestorm when the Breen demand they be handed over. Meanwhile, Book looks for ways to help as Tilly, Adira, and Reno work to decipher the latest clue. I want to start by saying Reno is probably my favorite character in all of Star Trek Discovery. I've said this a couple times throughout the 3 seasons that now she's been a part of. I've said this since season 2, right? That's when they found her.
Yes.
In that starship that was left for dead during the Klingon War. Yeah. So she's a character, David, that she's a gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, she is.
Every Star Trek series has always had that side character that we all remember. Once the series goes off into the history books, there's always that one character that was never intended to be very important, but because the writing and the actor themselves just really makes the character pop, you tend to remember them. Reno is one of those characters.
Oh, yeah. The fact that Tig Notaro has done such an amazing job with I hate to say this, but so little, because she doesn't.
They don't give her
she's not
much.
used a lot.
Yeah.
but when she's there, she immediately steals the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like she becomes front and center, the focal point every time. Every time Reno's on the screen, she suddenly is like the one who has the one-liner.
Yeah, dude, like when Tilly and Adira ask her about her past dealings.
Oh my
with,
God, I was laughing at that one.
pertaining to, was it libraries or the was it the collection of books?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's what it was. My memory's not working too well at the moment, but my point is that Reno just shrugs and says, "Oh, did I? Is that?" Like, I might have padded my resume.
I might have padded my resume a bit. And then she goes about explaining what she's done. And then, and it's like, I like Reno when she's paired up with the crew of Discovery, because the crew of Discovery are like, it's actually kind of cute that they seem almost out of sorts when they run into a character like her, much like how Raynor is.
Really, Reno and Raynor should be captain and first officer.
Captain, first officer, surrounded by the Discovery crew.
Can that be the spinoff, please?
Yeah, it'd be awesome. Because the Discovery crew would be running around like trying to figure them out, and they're just basically two people who don't give a crap.
I would work for both of them in a heartbeat. You know where you stand with people like that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing that's really interesting about like characters like Reno and Raynor. When you look at the Discovery crew are very...
You know what it is, David, is I think you and I are from a generation where we don't like hand-holding and coddling, and we just like to be, we like straight shooters. We like people to say what's on your mind. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to hurt my feelings. I need to hear facts. Let's just get down to business. And I think that's why you and I, as well as other people in our age range, tend to gravitate towards characters like these.
Yeah, and
it's a generational thing.
There you go. It's a generational thing, because I really find it very, very humorous watching the Discovery crew, because they're a very generational crew. They're more tied to like this generation of people,
correct,
than older generations.
Right.
And seeing them have to deal with characters who are tied more to the older generation, it very much is reminiscent of me watching, like, particularly like the younger generation of my family, when it comes to my nieces and nephews, and I have to watch them deal with my aunts and uncles. Being that middle generation and watching that, this is how I felt with Reno and watching her deal with Adira and Tilly. In no ways was it actually, like negative towards either party, but it's really fascinating watching two generational type of mentalities come together.
Yeah, dude, because in a way, that's pretty much what it is. This is the crews represent, when you look at it like that, it's almost like the crews represent a generational gap. You have the younger generation, millennials, Gen Zs, that are more accustomed to individuals acting, or at least they want people to act more like Burnham.
Yes.
More... I'm not trying to insult the younger generation. Every generation is different, and I think that's the reason why we have progress in society. So I'm not saying that's a negative. If we were all the same, we would never grow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So having generations that are slightly different is a good thing when you look at society and societal progress. But my point is that the Discovery crew is written in a way that fits more with the younger generation. And the way they choose to deal with things, their overall worldview, whereas Raynor and Reno fit more of our cynicism, our more jaded look at society, and that is very much, we are Generation X, and we are more cynical,
and that's what I really appreciate. And as amazing as it sounds, this episode has got me to like Adira even more, because now I look at Adira and I'm like, okay, she represents kind of like the newer generation. And watching that scene with her and Reno, when she's like really embarrassed about saying that, I think her exact words was like getting around.
Yeah.
And she gets like really embarrassed. And then Reno just looks at her and smiles.
No, I did.
And no, not when she says, oh yeah, like that.
Yeah, I like that.
And I'm like going, that was awesome, because like that made me relate more to Adira and understand Adira's character, where she she's not naive. She's just really young and represents that the current generation.
Yeah.
And seeing her paired off with someone like Reno, or even like in the last couple episodes when she's paired up with Raynor,
Yeah.
it's an amazing character growth for not just her character, but for both characters, because you see that those generations come together. And while they might clash, they still find a way to work together.
And doesn't that, at the end of the day, strengthen the overall world that Gene Roddenberry had envisioned?
Yeah.
That you have varying cultures and generations finding common ground.
Common ground.
So when you look at the parts that have made up Discovery, even though there are problems, there are issues with Discovery. It has had, and to this very moment, it has identity problems. It doesn't know quite what it wants to be. The 5th season and how it's changed its writing style is proof of that. The fact that we have 2 crew members, Detmer and Awosagun, gone. They're MIA, and we have 2 new characters on the bridge. Once again, we're in this state of trying to figure out who our crew is, where everyone is. In fact, if you look at season 5 as a whole, they have actually done far less in terms of our side characters than any other season since season 2.
Yeah, our bridge crew for Discovery,
They're just gone.
They're gone.
They're just not there. And I have to question why we're doing this again. Why, when you started finally fixing these problems a bit in Star Trek or in Discovery season 2, you started working on some of those problems, but it really was fixed moving into season 3.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, the show found itself. And because of ratings decline, I know there are studio mandates that probably push these writers into making decisions that feel a little ADHD at times. It feels a little, what's the word I'm looking for, David?
A little muddled.
It feels muddled, but I mean, we get it. And we can talk about those things later at the end of the season, because we're going to have a whole show where we discuss how it all ended. Anyways, overall, David, let's look at what the series or what this episode has done.
Yeah.
Okay, because it is a bounce back from the last episode, in my opinion. First off, I like what they're doing with Book. You and I have discussed our, not problems, but some of our smaller issues that we've had with Discovery when it comes to accountability of our characters. And in fact, one of our only problems we had with the final season was how it handled Book. You had this character that was attempting to commit genocide, and his punishment was essentially a slap on the wrist. At least that's what it seemed like. Now, moving into season 5, we see that it's something far more. It is a very strict type of community service. He's being directed where to go. He doesn't really have freedom. He doesn't have his own life. And when you see the moments they created in this episode where Book was confronted with an issue where he could very well fall right back into his old habits, they reminded us that they don't trust Book still.
Yes.
That, to me, was important. In order to create a total cohesiveness to your narrative, you can't simply forget what a character did. The fact that a character was actively attempting to annihilate another species. So when you have a moment where Nan comes in and says, listen, I just don't trust this guy. I remember what he was trying to do. Little things like that. Oftentimes, writers don't think that that's important.
And
but
that's
little moments like that create coherent character development.
And that's one of the moments that I really liked, that I was glad they brought into this episode with that scene with Nan, where we finally get to see, we understand the crew of Discovery is going to protect Book because Book is one of them. Okay, fine. Discovery will protect Book. But outside of Discovery, we need to see the repercussions fall on Book of all the choices, the consequences that he had from the last season. And having just that one scene with Nan, where Nan's like going, I do not trust you because you fired torpedoes at Discovery and tried to fire isolytic weapon.
And plus, it shows you that because she's never really been a full-fledged cast member of Discovery. She was part of Pike's crew, if you remember.
Part of Pike's crew, yeah.
So she doesn't have that kumbaya rapport with everyone else. And that's why bringing this character in works. Because, yes, she may not have that kumbaya rapport, but she also has a type of rapport with the crew. There's a respect there. There's an understanding. But that doesn't undermine the fact that she still has a duty to perform, and that duty may be prevented from doing that duty if Book attempts to be a rogue again.
Exactly, and that's why I like the fact that it wasn't. There was a little tension, but it was kind of like that reminder. That
Correct.
Book has consequences that he has to deal with because outside of Discovery crew who protects him, there are people in the Federation that do not trust him, and like. That's why I like that scene, that the way it ended with Non looking at Book and Burnham after Burnham vouches for Book, and Non basically jokingly says, "Well, that's why you're here where you are."
Yeah,
it's because Burnham's protecting him.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, finally we get some acknowledgement of that.
Yeah, and we also see that Book is learning because that's important. You got to have character arcs. And you have to have characters make mistakes, and then they learn. Last season, Book made a mistake. This season, he's trying to come to terms with those mistakes and fix the damage that he has done. And in an episode like this, where you draw attention not only to the mistakes he made through Non, but then you have that moment with Stamets, where Book decides to take off in the middle of working on something important with Stamets. And rather than allowing his personal feelings to control his actions, what does Book do? Thanks to Stamets' urging, which also shows a lot of growth
on Stamets' part
as a leader, as a member of the crew, when he reminds Book that this is the mission, and you see that acknowledgement or that recognition sink in on Book's face, I, as a viewer and as someone who analyzes the writing on this show, I was very appreciative that they brought that aspect to the forefront, because not only were we reminded of Book's mistakes, but we also are now seeing him take active steps to self-improvement and making sure he doesn't make those same personal decisions that lead to gross errors of judgment.
We're seeing natural evolution of that character.
Yeah.
Where he's not just a two-dimensional character that's going to repeat the process time and time again. He is a evolving character that has a character arc that now we get to see him change his character arc and take the steps to go up on that scale.
And we've seen a little bit of this throughout the season. I'm not saying they have completely disregarded that. That's been built in. It's been on simmer since the very first episode of the season. That Book made some serious mistakes. No one really knows if they can trust him. Even Burnham.
Yeah.
Even Burnham. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it feels like she ended her relationship with Burnham or with Book because of his mistake he made.
Mm-hmm.
What other reason does she choose not to continue her relationship? It seems like she saw something in him that didn't quite connect with her, and now she is trying to come to terms with this herself. And I think at the end of the day, they probably will find themselves again. They'll probably find that spark. But all of this, even Burnham and Book not being together, those are consequences for Book's actions as well.
Yes.
So, David, sometimes we are unfairly judged ourselves. People say we hold the writers to task a little too firmly at times, but here we are now saying, well, you guys did something that seemed like you were going to end it one way with Book, that there was no repercussions, but now we're seeing that those repercussions are actually innervated throughout the entire season.
Yes.
And that to me is just, I'm so thankful for that, because that was our biggest problem with the ending of last year.
Well, that's the biggest thing, too, is like you had to see something like this, some progression like this. And it's one of those things that when you're dealing with side characters, you can't judge a side character's growth by one episode. This is something that, unfortunately, we had to wait to the very end. And that's why in past episodes, me and you said, this is something we have to wait and judge by the end. If they don't acknowledge this, then that is bad writing.
Yeah.
That by far is bad writing. It's a bad story arc. Taking these, the thing that I was really impressed with this was like, not only did you focus on trying to make Book's story arc continue on and get it to its conclusion before the end of the season, but you also helped, just like what you mentioned earlier, Stamets. You helped bring in back Non and actually that outside Discovery influence, so that we can actually see people outside of the Discovery crew who, no knock on the Discovery crew, their entire bias is one-sided, where it's like everyone's together, everyone's in this kumbaya thing, and it's contained within the Discovery crew.
Their subjective experience has tied them together and created this bond.
Yeah, and it's understandable.
And that works in a lot of ways for story. But then when you're dealing with Starfleet and the Federation and rules and protocols, oftentimes these types of bonds don't often work well within those types of command structures.
Yeah.
And that's why when you bring in characters like Non, and you have Vance,
yeah,
and Tarina, suddenly you have outside perspectives come in, and this is in a large way, David, this is really what Discovery has been missing, an outside perspective. And using that outside perspective as a way to craft your narrative. That's a major strength this season, is using some of those outside perspectives, people who are not within, let's call it the Discovery in-group, that are more actively involved in this season's story. And because of that, you're getting a far better exploration of character, at least the characters that are front and center this season.
Yeah.
So that's a huge plus. And when you do things like this, that you also find creative ways, because in a lot of ways, Book was the linchpin to discovering the clue. You have an empath
yes,
who can find the clue because they realize, him and Stamets realize, that possibly this scientist who was a Beta-Zed or a Betazoid possibly embedded some type of emotion, feeling, some type of clue within the library card itself. So now you have Book not just there to create this narrative cohesion that ties back to the repercussions of season 4, but now you have the same character being used to create those connections and also solve the immediate dilemma.
Yes.
That's good writing.
That's good writing. And that's why as Discovery, as this writing crew has gotten along throughout the seasons, the later seasons of Discovery have really showed me that one of the things that me and you have harped about is like, we have to be careful about writers coming in as fans. And like, the writers of Discovery are fans. We know that, where they know the history, they know everything. But as the seasons have gone on, they've won me over with the fact that, yeah, you can hire people who are fans who are also good writers.
Yeah.
And that's what the Discovery crew, the writing room is. They are good writers who respect their IP. They use the IP in order to what? Fashion their own story. They don't do member berries. They got away from the whole freaking first 2 seasons of like Easter eggs constantly.
And that's the reasons why, to me, Star Trek Discovery is despite its issues, that's the reason why Star Trek Discovery has always been my favorite show in the Kurtzman era, is because it doesn't rely, at least the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, last 3 seasons.
It doesn't rely on, remember this? You remember the Enterprise? Remember Spock?
Remember the one of the very early episodes me and you talked about. We had an entire episode that was ridiculous, how people were focused on the ready room of the captain who was the captain of Discovery before Burnham.
Yeah, Lorca.
And everyone was talking about, oh, did you see this skeleton in the background? Did you see this piece of paraphernalia in the background? It's like,
I don't give a
Who
fuck.
fucking cares? I don't care.
I don't care if there's a Tribble on his desk or a Klingon skulls in the background.
Are you at least going to use it for the story? No, we just wanted to put it in the background.
Yeah.
It's like, no,
I
that's not how it's done.
Yeah.
Here, it's different. Like, I love the fact that the Discovery writing room there, they'll pick something out of Star Trek lore, but they'll make it fashion to the story.
They try to make everything their own.
Yeah.
And they try to be their own while respecting what came before.
The fact that they brought up the Badlands just made me giggle because that's like me and you spent an entire month talking about like the whole
do you think the caretaker?
marquee.
Well, do you think the caretaker will rip Discovery?
Rip
Take it. Not
Let's
that
hope
it
they don't go
matters.
there.
They have
Yeah.
a what's it called? Not the jump drive. What's it called?
They have the spore drive.
The spore drive. They can just get right back at home.
They get
very
back
easily.
very easily. But like the fact that basically they brought that up, and we're gonna see that, but not only are we gonna see the Badlands again, but they fashioned it to their story, how it works in their story.
Yeah, it does work. Even with the brain. I know we make jokes about this show just raping Ira Stephen Burr's ideas. And it's more jokes because we get it. Star Trek isn't owned by any one person, and these ideas are designed to be aspects of an IP that will now be used by any series. However, we make jokes because it's very evident that many of the modern Star Trek, even J.J. Abrams movies, were taking ideas from Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
And with the Breen, though, at least they're now doing something. Rather than simply taking the Breen and say, hey, guys, remember the Breen from Deep Space Nine? Well, no. Now they're doing something completely different with it and actually expanding their, I don't want to say their background, but their story a bit more so that we understand how they run their society. Because that's something that we didn't learn in Deep Space Nine. There were illusions, there were a few throwaway comments, but for the most part, Discovery is doing a pretty good job fleshing out the Breen, at least as they are in the 32nd century. And one thing we find out is that they are no longer united under one Imperium, but several factions. I believe it was 6 Primarchs are currently all vying for power, and that was the big reveal of the episode. We find out that Locke is Breen royalty, that he is a direct descendant of the Emperor. What does that mean for the future of Discovery? Meaning, how are they going to end this season? We're going to get to that in a second, but for the purposes of this specific episode, it allowed you know what? It gave greater purpose and justification for having Rayner, or I should say for having Locke and Maul together in this show. Because you kind of wondered, are they simply just a plot device and that's it? Just a way to
That's what I was
track
worried about.
clues? Are they going to become something more important to the series? And by having this reveal, suddenly they are far more important than just simply being a way to transport this MacGuffin across each episode to help with plot progression. It becomes something more solid and something that can potentially give closure to Star Trek Discovery, because in some ways I'm against this, but I also can see the benefits. I have a feeling that the way Discovery is going to end is with Maul being left in charge, or I should say Locke being left in charge of the Breen, and there being allusions to the Breen opening up communication with the Federation in a positive diplomatic fashion.
Yes.
Because if Locke can find common ground with Maul, that means he can also find common ground with the Federation, which means there's really no reason for them to not eventually join the Federation. Now, I'm not saying Discovery's going to end with them joining the Federation, but there will be some allusions to that. And that's a great way to end Discovery because it puts that feather in the cap. When we go back 10 years down the road and watch Discovery, we're going to say, well, what did this show do in a big way for Star Trek? You can point to every Star Trek series and say, well, TNG did this, Deep Space Nine did this, Voyager did this. Well, now we can look at Discovery, if this is the direction they're going to take, and say, well, they took the Breen and made peace with them.
Yeah.
That's their legacy. Because that's what we always go back to, David, when we discuss Discovery. Either off mic or during our discussions, we constantly talk about what is Discovery's legacy. You know, Enterprise's biggest legacy is the formation of the Federation.
Yes.
They fucked it up at the end, but it was not the writer's fault. It was due to the studio, obviously, and the cancellation of the series. But this could be a good way to bring big closure, not just to characters, but to Discovery. If they were to accomplish peace with the Breen, that could be a great way to end the series.
Oh, yeah, because, like, for me, just like what you alluded to, Enterprise's whole gambit was to show the history of the Federation, right? And to show the beginning process of that. Discovery's point, especially looking back
starting
at
with season
3, was to show the steps to something even greater than just
to reclaim the Federation's greatness.
Yeah, to reclaim the Federation's greatness, but not on top of that, to establish Gene Roddenberry's original concept, which is this belief that there is a possibility of this perfect utopia where everyone works together as one, and we even if we have these warring factions or these adversities factions just coming in out of nowhere, we can still work together in a diplomatic way.
Because Roddenberry's biggest driving point was that most problems are started through lack of communication.
Yes.
And through proper communication, one can achieve peace.
And look at the last 3 seasons of Discovery. Every single season has ended with Burnham trying to force the idea that basically communication is the key to win battles.
Yeah.
It isn't about firing the most torpedoes. It isn't about blowing up the Borg. It isn't about, all the flashiness and flying through a freaking Borg cube.
It's about finding a way to communicate.
Finding a way to communicate. And I know you're hesitant to actually see the Breen. Suddenly that's the final gambit.
Now, David, I'm not saying I want the Breen to go on barbecue cookouts with the Federation by the end of the season. I'm not saying that. In fact, that would feel really forced.
It would be really
if suddenly
forced.
there's peace with the Breen. But if they were to end it with that sense of optimism that this could actually lead to peace,
yeah,
that would be a great way to end it.
Yes, that would be the best solution. Don't end it with the overly kumbaya. Everyone's happy.
Yeah, we don't want a Sakal ending.
Yeah, don't
or a Species 10C ending where it's like, oh, like even though those all work, we don't need a third time.
Yeah,
where it's like, well, we found out how to communicate. Problems are solved. Everyone's peaceful now. We don't want that.
Yeah,
but you can still use those parts.
Yeah, we don't need a cry of a child to save the universe.
Well, dude, that's originally I thought that was going to happen in this episode when Maul showed her tattoo or her little insignia that's similar to Locke.
I did too.
I thought that they were going to fix the problems because she was pregnant.
She was pregnant.
I'm like,
oh God. How?
Yeah.
But luckily, I don't think they're going that route.
No, not at all.
I like the fact that they tied in Maul and Locke's relationship with how the Breen, their culture works, and how, in a lot of ways, their biracial relationship goes against the Breen's culture by light years. Like the Breen are very xenophobic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Play on the fact that basically, no, they're this couple that basically should not exist. But for some strange reason, Maul sees something in Locke and Locke sees something in Maul. I was worried they would do the really melodramatic thing about, Romeo and Juliet, and they would turn this couple into there. But in this...
you kissed by the book.
but this episode right here alleviated some things because they tied it with adding elements and taking the progression of the Breen society at the forefront, telling us things like what you said. The Breen are like at this point in a state of civil war with 6 like warlords that are trying to vie for power and everything else. And Locke is essentially the keeper of the throne. He's the bloodline that they're all looking for.
And obviously he feels different
and he
than
feels
everyone
different.
else, because didn't they say that he was already in trouble before he met Maul? He was stationed where Maul was because it was a form of punishment.
Yeah, it was a form of punishment, and to keep what? Control over him.
Yeah.
And that's that's the reason why I like that moment. As funny as it sounds, they did a lot of great goodwill in building up goodwill for Locke as a character, because like seeing those moments, like when he tells Burnham to spit in the face of my uncle if you see him.
Yeah.
And that tells you a lot about Locke's character.
Well, and also if you look at what they did last episode with, I guess you could even say they were purposely paralleling this in a lot of ways with the Terran Empire, and showing that the Terran Empire was going through the reason why they couldn't survive. And if you go back to Deep Space Nine, they said similar things. The reason why the Terran Empire fell, yes, it was due to reform, but also because of the infighting. That the infighting was eventually going to destroy them anyways, and that the reform itself wasn't necessarily the cause of them falling apart.
Yes.
In a lot of ways, you can see that probably was an idea they floated, not only because it just makes sense in a lot of ways for that particular episode, but also because of what's going to happen this season. I believe Locke will probably be that catalyst for reform.
And like the whole idea that a society based on kind of like what the Terran Empire was, where it was like it's a very backstabbing society where those up high have to be wary of people in the back, because people below their rank are constantly trying to actually get above them by any means necessary. If that means I have to stab you in the back, so be it. A society like that can't work. And that's why I like that they kind of posed a similar philosophical thought to the Breen, where the Breen are constantly at infighting because they do not have that one person that unifies them, that royalty. And because of that, you have all these warring warlords trying to vie for the throne. And the idea of Burnham's is if like using that to unify the Breen, I like that, because it brings up a philosophical question that always, once in a while, it peeks its head around Star Trek. The Terran Empire is like a perfect example of that, because like the stories they do in Star Trek of the Terran Empire, it's to really galvanize the idea that Gene Roddenberry said: a society that is born out of conflict cannot function. And that's what Gene Roddenberry has always said about Star Trek, is a society that is built on conflict cannot function and cannot attain utopia unless they have that, I guess you could say, that control in the very top. And that's what the Breen are missing.
Yeah, and we saw these ideas used before in Star Trek. The reason why the Klingons came to the table for peace was because of the infighting and the overmining of their world. They realized they just couldn't live the way they were living any longer. They needed alliances. And then you also have the Kazon, which never learned their lesson, but the Kazon as well was a society built on conflict. They were warring each other. They were opposing factions. And even just historically, if you look at societies where factions are warring against each other, a society cannot be strong and withstand the existential threats that all societies face if you're constantly at odds with each other.
And look at the Romulans. The Romulans were always in conflict with it because they were keeping secrets from each other. But once again, a society that is in conflict with itself cannot
But thanks
survive.
to Star Trek Picard Season 1, we now understand that they're actually afraid of all artificial life. Yeah, that's really the reason why they're so secretive.
Mike, don't ruin it.
Which makes no sense, but yeah.
Yeah. That's why I told you it was fantastic when Q came in, snapped everything back into place, and basically said, "We're fixed."
He could have given Jean-Luc Picard his organic body back too, but
No, that was his last middle finger to Picard.
if if Metalis would have done that, I think everybody would have realized, oh shit, he really did hate the first season, like all of us.
I got that sense. From the
Of
season
course,
2
dude.
that
Of
he
course,
hated it.
of course, he did. You cannot be a writer like Metalis, who's very good at what he does, who not only knows writing but also loves Star Trek, and not look at season 1 of Picard and think, what a fucking train wreck.
Well, that's why I told you one of my favorite scenes is Q's appearance in season 2, because it's essentially Metalis yelling at the season 1. What the fuck did you do wrong?
Season 2 was him trying to fix everything. All right, so let's bring it back here. Rayner still adjusting. We talked about him a bit.
Yes.
But just to close out the topic and finalize this, we learned a bit about Rayner as well. This, to me, is always key to any episode of television. No matter what's going on, never get bogged down by intricate plot or trying to progress the story forward if you're leaving your characters behind. And this is a perfect example of why the Rayner aspect, as well as Book, is a perfect example as to why this episode was strong. Not only is it pushing the mythos of Star Trek forward, because you're tackling the Breen, you're also pushing the actual plot of the season forward.
Yes.
Then you have key moments of development with Book and Stamets. Then you had those key moments between Burnham and Rayner, which were some of the best scenes Burnham has been involved in since season 3, when she was pushed with I can't talk, David. Hold on a second. Which is probably some of her best scenes since the writers paired her up with Georgiou, because Georgiou always got interesting things out of Burnham's in terms of character development. Putting them together was, to this day, I believe getting rid of Georgiou was one of the biggest mistakes Discovery made, because her character just generated character development. Having her thrown in the center like a chaotic writing device just helped us understand so many of our other characters, specifically Burnham. So when you have a moment like this with Burnham and Rayner, not only do you learn a lot about Burnham, we talked a lot about those aspects during our Patreon show.
Yes.
So we won't get into it too much, but what it really did was help us understand Rayner at a more intimate level. We are beginning to understand why he's a bit shut off.
Mm-hmm.
Why I don't want to call him aggressive, but he's not as emotionally open. And it's because he's still dealing with tragedy and grief.
Yeah.
He's still dealing with the destruction of his home world and how he should come to terms with that. He's a product, in a lot of ways, of genocide. He's a product of war.
Yes.
Now suddenly his whole entire character demeanor makes perfect sense.
Oh, yeah.
And we understand him at an emotional level without it getting overly melodramatic and without breaking a character who is not, realistically, if you have a character like this, they're not going to open up emotionally. They're not.
No.
And when writers try to make characters like this open up emotionally, it never works right, because people like this seldom open up. And if they do, it takes decades, like Picard.
No, like Kirk. Kirk is the
I would say
one.
Picard more so. I mean, Kirk oftentimes would show his emotion. He was afraid of intimacy. Picard was afraid of intimacy. And as we find out in season 2 of Picard, it's all tied to his relationship with his mother.
Yes.
So look how long it took for them to build that out with Picard in a way that makes sense. So you can't simply decide to change a character. Well, here at this moment in the same season, he is standoffish, unwilling to express himself emotionally, unwilling to share his problems with everyone. You can't do it 3 episodes later. So creating a situation like this with the Breen as a way to broker the conversation between Burnham and Rayner really works. And it shows a skill set within that writing room that we have always known is there, but sometimes they don't flex those specific writing muscles.
Oh yeah, and like the one thing that you mentioned just a little earlier, comparing this to Georgiou, and this is what's missing for Burnham. I'll take that even further and say, I think that the relationship that Burnham is currently working on with Rayner is something that she should have had since day one, because while she had those parallels, like we always mentioned, she had Georgiou and Saru, and in a lot of ways Pike. All those are a very different relationship than what she has with Rayner. The relationship she has with Georgiou and Saru is more like a mentorship or a brother-sister relationship. With Rayner, it is really truly like a captain and a first officer, much more like, Kirk and Spock, much more like Picard and Riker.
Mm-hmm.
This is what has been missing for Burnham, because for a Star Trek character that is the lead, they always have that one person who is not tied to them familiarly, but basically is someone that they can talk to and, kind of bounce opposing viewpoints off of.
Mm-hmm.
With Saru and Georgiou, she's not going to get those parallel viewpoints because they're coming from a different relationship that she has.
Well, just like in real life, each of us have varying individuals that we communicate with about different things in our life at different times.
Yeah.
Because each individual, each relationship, or I should say interpersonal relationship, offers different insights.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, David, so bringing our discussion to an end, the next clue is revealed to be hidden within an intergalactic library archive that will lead the Discovery team to the Badlands. And that's how the episode pretty much ended. My overall thoughts, strong episode, great character development. I'm going to give it a 90%. I will say, David, that Star Trek Discovery's use of the Universal Translator seems to be the worst in all of Star Trek. This is something that I make fun of about in all Star Trek, but the Universal Translator just doesn't make sense, because oftentimes you'll have species who never acknowledge that the lips aren't moving, and I feel like at this point in the game, we all just shrug and just accept it. There's certain things that you just do that with. But even with the last episode, whistle speak, did you not notice that these two people were not whistling when they communicate and speak?
Yes.
It's a little strange, especially when people don't speak normally, like opening and closing your mouth.
Yeah.
As they had said with that particular species in the last episode, they spoke with whistles. So do they not see that they're not speaking the same way? And then in this episode, you had the Primarch arrive, and he's speaking the Breen language.
Yes.
They all have universal translators, unless they turn them off. But the only one that knows what he's actually saying is Trina. And I'm like, well, you guys had universal translators. I think everyone in that room knows exactly what he's saying.
And it was that moment that I'm like going, you're just using the universal translator like as a quote unquote writing device because you want to emphasize that the Primarch just is non-negotiable.
Yeah, I guess, David. I think you're trying to find justification.
You're trying to find justification.
I think the universal translator is just a bad idea. It probably was always a bad idea from the very beginning of Star Trek, because they never really bothered to make it make sense.
This is the one piece of tech that everyone doesn't talk about that I think should be talked about Star Trek, that they shouldn't have tried to explain it.
No, because, dude, I've always had problems. I think Deep Space Nine is probably the second series that got under my skin, because you were dealing with so many different species every single episode.
Dude, Voyager how the heck do they understand everybody from there if they're from that freaking quadrant and no one's actually talked to them?
I just think it's bizarre because, especially with like going back to Deep Space Nine, the Klingon thing's always the funniest thing. Forget Deep Space Nine, all Klingons has always been a funny thing
Yes.
because every once in a while they decide to say "kapla."
Kapla,
Well,
just randomly.
but the universal translator should be translating that. We shouldn't hear that.
We shouldn't hear that. Exactly.
It's at this point, I think all of us just shrug and go with it. But there's moments in Discovery where they're just like, "Yeah, fuck it,"
Yes.
completely just fuck it.
That's the thing that I crack up at with like the Klingon thing, because like when they did it in Discovery, so many people had such a shit fit, and me and you were the ones that are pointing out why wouldn't the universal translator just say what the hell are they saying?
That's why I liked what the original showrunners did. It's one of the few things I liked what they did when it comes to the first season of Discovery. I wasn't a first season hater. There were a lot of problems with that season. But one of the things I liked was that the Klingons spoke Klingon and there were subtitles.
Subtitles, yeah. I love that.
And when the Federation were in the same area, then we understood them. That was an interesting way to distinguish between when the universal translator is working and when there is no universal translator present and the Klingons are speaking their native language.
Exactly.
That was one of the strongest moments in Discovery, was going with that decision. But since then, they have just decided to just fall in line with the rest of the Star Trek shows that don't really give two shits about the universal
So
translator.
like, I think because like a lot of the writers are like, let's not tackle this. This is gonna hurt us.
Yeah. All right, David, final thoughts?
My final thoughts on this: I'm actually the same score as you. I gave this as a 90. It's one of my favorite episodes of the season, actually, because like
Yeah.
I really like what they did in this episode in regards to story character arcs. I have become like a major proponent for character arcs, making sure as a writer you keep me engaged with all of your characters. They started with this menagerie of characters. They better actually do as much as they can with these characters. And in my opinion, this episode, the writing room in this one did the best job in making every single character count. Like, there wasn't any time where I basically said, okay, why is this character here? The only nitpick that I would have is like what me and you were talking about in our, I believe it's our Unimatrix and our Patreon, about the bridge crew, how the bridge crew constantly just changes out.
Yeah.
And I can overlook that as long as your main story arcs for the characters you introduce are continually going on throughout the season. They did it with Book. They did it with Stamets. They did it with Adira, Tilly. They did it with Rayner, Burnham. And they actually did something with that made me interested in Locke and Maul. Because now I understand that it's more than just a Romeo and Juliet relationship where, you know, they're going to do like what you said. Unfortunately, she's pregnant with his child. And no, they're not going to do that.
Pregs.
Yeah, they're not going to do that. Thank God.
I'm going to have his baby.
How? Did he like impregnate you with his slime or something? But like, so like, I
Slime.
don't feel that worried anymore with those characters. I'm now interested to see how are they going to end this off.
Her water's going to break, and she's going to think her
and
water
green
break.
ooze, oh,
She's going to think her water broke, but she actually gave birth.
It's actually Locke. That's how he's reborn.
Oh, I was going to say her child. It was just liquid.
Locke's like, I've been hiding here this whole time.
Surprise!
Surprise!
That's disgusting, David. Go ahead. Finish your nasty thoughts.
But overall, I really like this episode. I mean, especially with like, it again goes to like what I've been saying for the last couple episodes. My only reticence about this season is the fact that you've got me to really now care about characters like Adira and Rayner and Burnham to some degree, where it's like, this is the final season. We're not going to see any more of these characters. And now I want to, because I want to see the relationship of Burnham and Rayner actually as captain and first officer.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. even like with Rayner and Adira, now that we know more of Rayner's background of how his family was massacred by the Breen, and now it explains more why Rayner is a little bit more softer with younger people, because he looks at them as almost like children. He might be, you know, irritated from time to time, but the amazing thing when I look back at the episode, especially with him dealing with Adira, it's far different when he's with, say, someone like Burnham. He's more supportive of Adira. Is that because like Adira's that young?
Yeah. Well, it goes to show you that just because you seem different, this is why I love Star Trek. Difference does not mean differing goals. So Rayner is all about Starfleet principles, Starfleet ideology. He just has a different mode, a different means to get to the same end. And that's an important idea that I believe many people should understand in everyday real society. And that just because you don't agree with this person, look at what they're really saying. Are they kind of saying the same thing you are, but they don't agree with your methods to get to the same goal that you have set for yourself? When you look at politics, oftentimes you can do away with your annoyances by realizing that this person here may be on the opposite side of the political spectrum, but their ends is the same.
Yes.
It's not always the case, but often it is. It's just the means to get there is different. We have opposing ideas on our methods.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a great way to frame Rayner with the rest, or I should say, contrast Rayner with the rest of the Discovery crew. He has the same agendas. He loves Starfleet. He loves the Federation. He just has different methods to getting there. Yeah. All right. This brings us to the end. We'll be back next week with the 8th episode discussion. Later.
Live long and prosper.